The taxi pulls up to the gate at 4:17 in the afternoon, and I know the exact time because I checked my phone right as my cousin Marcus leaned over the porch railing and started laughing. Not a quiet chuckle. Not a polite smile he was trying to hide. A full, loud, performative laugh, the kind that's designed to be heard by everyone within 30 feet. He nudged his wife with his elbow and pointed at the car, and she covered her mouth with her hand. But her shoulders were already shaking, and then my Aunt Dolores looked up from her lawn chair and shaded her eyes against the afternoon sun and squinted at the cab pulling through the gate, and I could see her processing it, the whole calculation happening in real time across her face. Yellow car, standard Crown Victoria, no rental sticker, no Uber logo, just an old taxi with a guy in his 60s at the wheel pulling up to my Uncle Raymond's 75th birthday reunion like it was 1987 fifth. Did he seriously come in a taxi? Marcus said it loud enough that the whole front yard could hear. And the whole front yard was listening, because there were maybe 22, 23 people out there. Lawn chairs, folding tables, kids running through the grass. My aunts clustered near the porch with their paper plates, and Marcus had positioned himself in the center of it all, the way he always did, with the instincts of someone who had spent his whole life making sure he was in the center of it all. I paid the driver and stepped out. The Georgia air hit me the way it always hits you when you've been away. Thick and humid and so heavy with heat that the first breath feels like walking into a room someone left the oven on. Late July in this part of the state is a specific kind of punishment, and I had on a plain white shirt, dark jeans, clean sneakers, nothing flashy. I thought about that on the plane, decided against it, came home looking like myself. I heard someone say, "Where's his car?" and someone else laugh in response, and my mother was standing on the porch steps, looking at me with the exact expression she reserves for moments when she is proud of me and is working very hard not to show it, because showing it in front of these particular people would make things complicated. And then the driver, his name was Earl, I know that now. We talked for the whole 2-hour drive down from Atlanta, but I didn't know his name when I was walking up the path with my bag. Earl stepped out of the driver's side and leaned over the roof of the car and called out to me. "Mr. Cole." His voice carried easy and natural across the yard. "You forgot your phone in the back seat." He held it up. My phone, which I'd set on the seat when I was wrestling my bag out of the trunk. I turned around and walked back to the car. Took the phone from him. Thanked him. Started to turn away. "You need me to come back and get you Sunday, boss?" Not sarcastically. Not as a performance. Just naturally. The way a man speaks to someone he's worked for the better part of 8 months, across 43 vehicles and 3 city contracts and more overnight shifts than either of us had ever planned on. Earl drove for the company I'd built in Portland over the last 3 years, starting with one leased vehicle and a spreadsheet I kept on a laptop in a studio apartment I could barely afford. I told him I'd call if I needed him. He touched the brim of his flat cap, got back in the car, and pulled out. When I turned back to face the yard, the laughing had stopped. Not wound down. Stopped, the way a record stops when someone lifts the needle. 20-something people, mid-conversation, mid-bite, mid-drink, all of them reconfigured in that moment into an audience that had just been given information they weren't prepared for and were now deciding, individually and collectively, what to do with it. Marcus was still leaning on the porch railing. His smile had gone somewhere complex. My mother, on the steps, finally let herself look proud. "My name is Darius Cole. I'm 31 years old. I grew up in a mid-sized Georgia city that I'm going to call Grover because I don't need this to be any more identifiable than it already is. My family is large and southern and church-going and deeply, genuinely, architecturally concerned with appearances. My grandmother on my father's side, my dad passed when I was 12, which is its own story I'm not telling today, was the kind of woman who would make you iron your t-shirt before a trip to the grocery store. Not because anyone would see you, because the habit mattered. Because you presented yourself a certain way in the world, and that presentation was a form of self-respect, and self-respect was non-negotiable. She'd grown up with very little, and had watched what happened to people who let the world see them as less than they were. And she had decided, somewhere in her early years, that no one in her orbit was going to make that mistake. Status mattered. What the neighbors thought mattered. What people at church thought mattered. What other families thought of your family mattered. The problem was that I was never good at performing it. I drove a used car. I worked at a logistics company after college, a job that was solid and paid okay and did not make for interesting conversation at family dinners. I wasn't dating anyone impressive. I rented an apartment rather than buying a house. I didn't have a title that landed well. I was just adequate, and in my family, adequate was the same as invisible. My cousin Marcus, on the other hand, had married into a family with money, drove a leased BMW that he referenced in conversation more than you'd think was possible without seeming intentional. worked in pharmaceutical sales, wore a watch that cost more than 3 months of my old rent, and had, most importantly, in the specific economy of my family, a mother who was willing to make his accomplishments the centerpiece of every gathering. Aunt Dolores. I need to talk about Dolores properly because she's central to everything that happened, and I want to be fair to her, which is harder than it sounds. Dolores is not a cruel person. She's not some cartoon villain. She's a 62-year-old woman who loves her son with the specific and sometimes destructive intensity of a mother who decided early that her children's success was the metric by which her own life would be measured. She's smart. She's warm in her way. She can read a room better than almost anyone I've ever met. And she has, over the course of my entire adult life, operated with the quiet, persistent certainty that Marcus had arrived and I had not, and that this was simply the correct and obvious reading of the facts. She wasn't unkind about it. She was something worse. She was gentle about it. She asked me questions about my life with the soft, slightly too careful tone you use with someone who's been sick. She recommended things to me: job opportunities, apartment complexes, financial advisors, with the helpful energy of someone who assumes you need guidance. She told people about Marcus's salary the way other people tell you about a sunset, not bragging, just sharing something beautiful. And I had let all of this happen for years without doing anything about it, partly because I didn't have the ammunition to do anything about it, and partly because something in me believed that the right response to people underestimating you was to do the work and let the work speak, eventually, for itself. 3 years ago, I left Grover for Portland with $8,200, a duffel bag, and what my grandmother had always described as a stubbornness that would either make me or bury me. What I built there is what this story is about. I want to be clear about something before I go further because I know how this kind of story usually reads online. And I want to push back against the version where I'm the genius protagonist executing a flawless plan while everyone around me is a comically obvious villain. It wasn't like that. When I moved to Portland, I had an idea, not a business plan, an idea. An observation, really, that a specific gap existed in the city's transportation market. Rideshare apps handled casual personal rides, limo companies handled events. But the middle space, corporate accounts, medical transport, hotel partnerships, event companies that needed reliable, dedicated drivers rather than the randomness of rideshare. That space was underserved. Not empty, but underserved. There were companies doing pieces of it badly. I thought I could do it better. I leased one vehicle, a clean, late model sedan. I drove it myself for the first 4 months, which meant I was working roughly 16 hours a day, doing my actual job in the daytime, learning the city's roads and traffic patterns and the specific needs of the clients I was slowly acquiring in the evenings and on weekends. I got my first corporate account through a hotel front desk manager who'd gotten frustrated with rideshare cancellations on important client pickups. I drove that account myself for 2 months until I could afford a second vehicle and a first driver. The first driver I hired was a man named Antoine, who was 57 years old, had driven professionally for 20 years, and had the natural dignity of someone who understood that driving people places was a service and a skill, and neither below nor above him. Antoine is still with me. He manages 2 of our routes now. The second driver was Earl. I say all of this because the company didn't spring into existence. It was built by increments so small that there were months where I couldn't see any forward movement at all, where I was just surviving, making payroll, keeping accounts alive, driving shifts myself when someone called out, sleeping 4 hours at a stretch, subsisting on gas station food, and the particular low-grade anxiety of someone who has put everything they have into a thing that hasn't proven itself yet. There were 2 specific nights, one in the first year, one in the second, when I sat in a parking garage in my own car after a shift and calculated in a calm and methodical way whether I had made a catastrophic mistake. Both times the calculation came out the same. I wasn't sure. I was not sure. The only thing that kept me going on those nights was the specific stubbornness my grandmother had named when I was 7 years old, and that I had never quite been able to turn off. By the end of year 3, I had 43 drivers, 3 city contracts, medical transport agreements with 2 hospital systems, a partnership with a regional hotel group, and last year's gross revenue was a little over $2.3 million. I had not told my family any of it, partly because I'd learned, growing up, that talking about what you were building before it was built was a good way to have people invest their opinions in your dream before it was stable enough to bear the weight of those opinions. Partly because I wasn't sure how to explain it in terms that would translate in a world where success was measured by salary and title and the model year of your car. And partly, this is the honest part, because I needed to know that what I had built was mine, not built to win an argument, not built to prove a point. Mine. The approval, if it came, would come after. I hadn't planned to come back in a taxi. That was just logistics. Earl wanted a long run. I didn't want to rent a car for a weekend. It made sense. The entrance, that was just luck. My mother hugged me at the door and whispered that I looked good and she was glad I was home. Beverly Cole is 63 years old and has the specific emotional intelligence of a woman who has spent decades navigating a large and complicated extended family with grace and almost zero credit for it. She knows everything, says very little, and chooses her moments with the patience of someone who has learned that timing matters more than volume. She knew more about what I'd built in Portland than anyone else in the family. Not the full picture. I'd been careful even with her, not from distrust, but from the instinct to protect the thing until it was undeniable. But she knew enough. She'd heard enough in our phone calls, read enough between the lines of the things I didn't say, to have a general understanding that I was doing something real. Don't say anything, I told her quietly at the door. I never do, she said, and we both knew that was true in ways that went back decades. My Uncle Raymond found me within 5 minutes. Raymond is the best version of what a large Southern family can produce. 75 years old, broad-shouldered, completely at peace with himself, possessed of the particular ease of a man who has long since stopped needing anyone's approval and now just finds everything mildly, warmly amusing. He grabbed me in a hug that lasted about 10 seconds and told me I was skinny and asked if they fed people in Oregon. Portland's in Oregon, Uncle Raymond. That's what I said. His wife, my Aunt Gloria, appeared at my elbow with a plate of food before I'd fully registered the conversation. Gloria operates gatherings the way air traffic control operates airports. Complete situational awareness, total commitment, zero drama, everything moving exactly where it needs to be. I found a seat at one of the long tables in the backyard and was just starting to feel the specific unwinding that happens when you've been away from your family long enough that being back feels like putting on an old coat. Familiar in a way that's partly comfort and partly just the memory of comfort, when Marcus appeared and sat across from me. Marcus is 34. He's good looking, and he knows it, not in an arrogant way exactly, more in the way of someone who discovered early that his appearance was a resource and has been methodically investing it ever since. He has a specific conversational style that I've observed for 30 years. He asks questions that are actually statements. The question is the delivery mechanism. The statement is the point. Still at that logistics company, he said. No. Left when I moved. Right, right. What are you doing now? Transportation business? What, like Uber or something? I let a beat pass? Not exactly. He waited for elaboration. I didn't provide any. This is a small game, but it's one I've gotten good at. The withholding of detail as a form of patience, not secretiveness, just the refusal to pitch myself to someone who has already formed their opinion. So you're like a driver. I have drivers, I said. Another beat. He tilted his head the way he does, a small practiced movement that communicates skepticism without quite committing to it. How many drivers? 43 right now. Something moved across his face. A quick rearrangement of assumptions. He recovered fast. Gross or net? I looked at him. Sorry, he said, laughing slightly. Habit, numbers brain. He leaned back. That's cool. That's a decent little operation. Decent little operation. I filed that phrase. What are you at this year? He said. I'm tracking about 210. New territory, so the ramp was rough, but it's looking good. 210,000. Laid out with the specific casual weight of a man who wants you to react to a number without technically bragging. Good for you, I said. He waited for the reciprocal disclosure. I ate my food. What are you doing revenue-wise? He said. It's going well. He did the slow nod. The nod that says, I've interpreted your refusal to give me a number as evidence that the number isn't impressive. I've stored this data, and I'll be moving on now. You should talk to my guy about investment, he said. When you're ready to think about that stuff. When you're ready. Like it was a next step I hadn't gotten to yet. Thanks, I said. Dinner was on long tables set up in the backyard with string lights along the fence and Gloria's cooking spread across 6 folding tables in a display that I'm pretty sure violated some law of physics around the conservation of food. The kind of dinner that happens only when a very good cook decides someone they love deserves the full expression of their abilities. My grandmother Evelyn sat at the end of the main table. She always sits at the end, not because anyone assigns her the seat. She doesn't need assignment. It just belongs to her, the way certain things belong to certain people through the simple accumulation of who they are over a lifetime. She's 80 years old, and she has the face of someone who has seen enough of the world that she finds it interesting rather than surprising. She doesn't miss things. In 40 years, I have never seen her miss something that mattered. I sat with her for a while after the eating slowed. She held my hand and asked about Portland. I told her about the rain and the coffee culture in the mountains, which on clear days you can see from the right streets. And she listened the way she always listens, like what you're saying is actually the most interesting thing happening in her vicinity, which makes you want to keep talking. You look settled, she said. I am. You look like someone who's been working hard. I have. She studied my face. My grandmother has a way of looking at you that feels like she's reading something written just below the surface. Whatever it is you're carrying, she said, you don't have to put it down tonight. But before you leave, I'd like to hear it. I told her I'd find the time. I went back toward the food tables and found myself next to my Aunt Dolores, who had the specific energy of someone who has been waiting for a particular conversation and has decided now is the time. Darius. She touched my arm warmly. It is so good to see you. You look wonderful. Portland agrees with you. Thank you, Aunt Dolores. Are you doing okay out there? I know it's expensive. I read an article. The cost of living. She made a face of sympathetic concern. I'm managing. Of course you are. You always manage. A pause waited with implication. Marcus has been just exceptional this year. New territory opened up and he really stepped up. I told him I was proud of him. She did this at every gathering. Marcus's accomplishments as the conversational weather. Always present. Occasionally violent. That's great, I said. You know, she said, leaning in slightly confidentially, you really should talk to him about opportunities. He knows people. He's connected now in a way that could genuinely help you. He would love to help you get positioned. She said it with such earnest warmth that I had to remind myself to notice what she was actually saying. She was suggesting that my 34-year-old cousin could position me. I'll keep that in mind, I said. Here is what I hadn't told you yet, and it's the part that changed everything about why this reunion mattered. 6 months before, my mother had called me on a Tuesday night, late. I was finishing up route reports. She had the specific tone in her voice that she only uses when she's been holding something too long and has finally decided she has to say it. My grandmother's house was in trouble. Not legally. Not immediately. But in the particular way that trouble develops when you combine an old house, a fixed income, deferred maintenance, and a family that is better at talking about doing things than actually doing them. The house where I spent every summer of my childhood, where my grandfather built the back porch with his own hands, where 3 generations of family had gathered for every funeral and wedding and birthday and crisis, had needed significant repairs over the past 2 years. New roof, foundation work, an HVAC system that had been running on determination and prayer since before I was born. My grandmother had a fixed income from my grandfather's pension and her Social Security. It wasn't nothing, but it wasn't enough for $60,000 of structural repairs. My mother had contributed what she could, which was real and meaningful and still not enough. The rest of the family had expressed sympathy and made suggestions and contributed very little money. What had happened instead, and this is the part that my mother's voice went tight around, was Marcus and Dolores. Marcus had paid for the roof, $30,000. He'd framed it as pure family love. He told my grandmother not to worry about it. That family takes care of family. He'd said it in front of people at a Christmas gathering in a way that made sure it was witnessed. And then Dolores had started having conversations with my grandmother. Not threatening conversations, nothing you could point to. Just conversations. About the house, about legacy, about what it meant to be invested in the family's future. About how, when the time came, it only made sense for a property like this to go to someone who had shown their commitment to it, someone who understood what it meant, someone who had demonstrated, through action, that they saw its value. Dolores had used, according to my grandmother, the word appropriate approximately 4 times over the course of several months. My mother's read, which I trusted completely, was this. No one had pressured my grandmother legally. Nothing was signed. But a set of expectations had been planted and were quietly growing, and my grandmother, who was 80 years old and tired and did not want conflict with people she loved, had not shut the conversation down the way she might have if she'd been younger or less exhausted. And now the conversation had grown into a shape that was hard to reverse without someone doing something deliberate about it. My grandfather built that house in 1967. He planted the rose bushes in the front yard. He put down the hardwood floors himself, board by board, over 3 weekends. He died in the back bedroom in 2019, and my grandmother had been in that house for 52 years. And it was, in every meaningful sense, her life made physical. The idea that it might drift toward Marcus and Dolores through the slow accumulation of implied obligation, not through any legal mechanism, not through any formal decision, but through the patient, persistent weight of an expectation that nobody had explicitly agreed to, but that everyone had somehow absorbed. That idea had sat in my chest for 6 months like a stone. I hadn't come back for the reunion because of it. I'd come back because it was Uncle Raymond's 75th, and because I hadn't been home in 3 years, and because my mother needed to see me. But the house situation was present. It was the thing underneath the other things. After the dinner plates were cleared and the older generation had migrated inside to the living room, and the air cooled from brutal to merely warm, I found myself in the backyard with the younger set. Somebody had a speaker going. Kids were chasing each other between the chairs. My cousin Janelle found me and sat down next to me on the back steps. Janelle is 30 years old and works as a cardiac nurse and is, along with my mother, one of the two most perceptive people in my family. She has a flat, clear gaze that doesn't miss things and a very low tolerance for performance of any kind, which makes her slightly dangerous at family gatherings, because she will occasionally say the true thing in a room full of people performing the untrue thing, and the discomfort that follows is real. So Marcus is telling everyone you're an Uber driver, she said. I know. Did you correct him? I told him I had 43 drivers. He decided that meant I was running a carpool. She looked at me sideways. How many drivers do you actually have? 43. A pause. Is that a thing you made up or a real number? It's a real number. It's a real number. Darius. What? You've been running a transportation company in Portland for 3 years and you didn't tell anybody. I wasn't sure it would work, I said, which was true. And then it was working, and I still wasn't sure it would keep working. And now? Now it's working. She was quiet for a moment. In the yard, one of the smaller kids fell down and cried briefly and was picked up by someone and immediately stopped crying and ran away. Is this about the house? Janelle said. I looked at her. My mom mentioned something, she said, about Dolores having conversations with Grandma, about how things should go. She paused. I've been watching Dolores all night. She's been positioned, like she's managing something. She is managing something, I said. What are you going to do? I didn't have a full answer yet. I had pieces of one. Whatever it is, Janelle said, don't do it tonight. Raymond's birthday. One good night. I told her that was exactly right and meant it. Around 9 o'clock, my grandmother appeared at the back door and looked out across the yard until she found me. She didn't call my name. She just looked at me and tilted her head, and I got up and went to her. We went through the house and out the front door and sat on the porch swing. The creak of that swing, rhythmic, particular, the sound of a specific rusted joint that has never been fixed in the 40 years I've been aware of it, is one of the most immediately transporting sounds I know. It puts me back in myself at age 9, at 11, at 17, all at once. The street was quiet. Street lamps. Crickets. 2 houses down a sprinkler was running. The evening had that particular thick softness that Georgia summer nights can produce when the worst of the heat has lifted but the warmth is still in everything. Earl seems like a good man, my grandmother said. I turned to look at her. He knocked on the door looking for somewhere to get food, she said. She talked for a while. I could picture that conversation, and it was both completely surprising and entirely predictable. Earl is 64 years old, retired military, from a small Alabama town not unlike this Georgia one. My grandmother would have had him fed and talking inside of 5 minutes. What did he tell you? I asked. He told me you started the company with 1 car, that you drove it yourself for the first 4 months. She paused. He said that even after you had 15 drivers, you'd still pick up overnight shifts when someone called out because you didn't think it was right to ask employees to do something you wouldn't do yourself. I didn't say anything. He said when you got your first hospital contract, you spent the entire night reconfiguring routes instead of delegating it because you wanted to understand the work before you handed it off. She paused again. He seems to think very highly of you. Earl's generous. Earl doesn't seem like a man who says things he doesn't mean. She looked at the street. Why didn't you tell us, Darius? Not hurt, not accusatory. Genuinely curious, the way she is about most things. Because for a long time, I wasn't sure it was going to work, I said. And I couldn't have handled this family having opinions about a thing that was still fragile. And after it started working, I thought about how to answer that. I needed to know it was mine, I said. Not built to prove something. Not built to prove something. Not built because anyone was watching. Mine. She nodded slowly, the way she nods when she has accepted something. Dolores has been talking to me, she said. She didn't set it up or preface it. Just put it on the table between us. I know about the house, about appropriate arrangements, about investment and commitment. She said the words with a slight dryness that told me what she thought of them. She's not a bad woman. I want you to understand that I know she's not a bad woman. But she's been having a conversation with me that I didn't quite invite and haven't known how to end without hurting people I don't want to hurt. Grandma, let me finish. She held up one hand, gently. I am 80 years old. I have watched this family do a great many things over a great many years. I know exactly what is happening. I am not confused. I am not being manipulated in any legal sense. What I am is tired, and there is a difference between being confused and being tired, and people sometimes mistake one for the other. She looked at me. I want you to know that nothing has been decided. Nothing is official. Your grandfather left this house to me, and I will decide what happens to it. I know, I said. Do you? Because I want you to actually know it, not just say it. I know it, I said. And then I'd like to take over the financial upkeep of the house, all of it going forward, the maintenance, the repairs, everything. And I want to reimburse Marcus for the roof. She was very still. That's not a small amount of money. 30,000 for the roof. Plus I'd set up a maintenance fund so there's always capital available. You'd never have to think about the house financially again. You can do this. Yes, without strain, without strain. She sat with it. The swing creaked its slow, familiar creak. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked twice and stopped. Your grandfather would have loved this, she said quietly. Not about the money. About all of it, the building, the return, the whole shape of it. She looked at me with those reading eyes. He would also, she said, have laughed himself absolutely sick at the taxi. And I laughed. For the first time all day, a real laugh. The involuntary kind that comes from the chest without asking permission. And she laughed too, and we sat there in the swinging porch in the Georgia dark for a long time, not saying much, the swing creaking its ancient particular creak. I slept well that night, which surprised me given what I knew was coming in the morning. Slept in my old room, which my grandmother had kept exactly as it was when I left Grover at 18, which is both touching and slightly unnerving. Same navy blue comforter. Same poster of a basketball player I can't even identify now. Same window that looks out over the rose bushes. I lay in bed for a while before I slept, looking at the ceiling and thinking about the fact that those rose bushes were planted the year my father was born, which my grandmother had told me in a different conversation years ago. My grandfather had wanted something that would come back every year, whether you tended it or not, something that persisted. I thought about persistence, about what it means to build something quietly when no one is watching, and what it means to come back to a place that knew you as someone smaller and stand there as something different. I thought about whether it was possible to do that without it becoming performance, without the return becoming the point. I didn't fully resolve it. Fell asleep somewhere in the middle of thinking about it. Breakfast the next morning was the informal kind. People filtering through the kitchen in overlapping waves. Gloria running eggs and biscuits with the focused energy of a woman who considers hospitality a spiritual practice. Coffee perpetually on the counter. I came down around 8:30. My mother was there with a cup of coffee. Janelle. 2 cousins I didn't know well, an uncle by marriage who I'd spoken to maybe 6 times, and Marcus, who was on his second cup and scrolling his phone with the focused energy of a man who had been up for hours processing something. He put the phone down when I came in. I poured coffee and sat at the table, and for a moment we were just family having breakfast, which was fine and normal and not what either of us was thinking about. I did some research last night, Marcus said. I looked at him over my coffee. About transportation companies in Portland, market size, the kind of contracts you can get, hospital systems, hotel partnerships. He'd looked it up. I let that land without expression. 43 drivers, he said. That's a real operation. Yes. Why didn't you say anything? You asked if I was a driver. I said, not how the company was doing. He absorbed that. What's your revenue situation? He said. I'd thought about whether to say the number. I'd gone back and forth on it the night before in the 15 minutes before I fell asleep. There were arguments on both sides. The argument for saying it was simple, the number was real, it was mine, I wasn't ashamed of it, and there was no reason to hide it. The argument against was more complicated and had to do with intentions and optics and what the number would do in a room like this kitchen with a family like this one. I said the number. Last year was a little over 2.3 million gross, net was around 640. The kitchen did something. It didn't go silent exactly, there were sounds, the coffee maker, the birds outside, someone upstairs. but the human noise in it recalibrated in a specific way. My mother turned very slightly toward the window. Janelle developed a sudden interest in her coffee cup. The cousins I didn't know well exchanged a brief glance. Marcus sat very still. 640,000, he said, like he was reading it from something. Yeah, net, net. He was quiet for a full, real, significant moment. I watched several things happen in his face. Disbelief first, the automatic response of someone confronted with information that doesn't fit their established model of a situation. Then recalculation, visible and a little painful, like watching someone do arithmetic on a chalkboard they thought was already solved. And then, underneath that, something else. Something more honest. I made that comment, he said. When you pulled up, yeah, about the taxi. I heard it. I didn't. He stopped. I didn't know. I know you didn't. That doesn't make it. He stopped again, rubbed the back of his neck. I shouldn't have said it regardless. There it was, not a full apology. Marcus isn't someone who does full apologies easily, probably because he was raised in an environment where vulnerability was managed carefully. But it was the honest acknowledgement of something real, and I respected it more than a performed apology would have been. It's fine, I said, and I meant it, mostly. You made a reasonable assumption. Based on nothing. Based on what you knew, I said, which was nothing. He nodded at his coffee. Something in him had shifted. The competitive posture, the asking about numbers, the 210 before bonus, the watch, the BMW tangentially mentioned, all of it had deflated slightly. Not eliminated, but reconfigured. 2.3 million, he said quietly. It took 3 years, I said. It wasn't fast. Still, I agreed. Dolores arrived mid-morning. She came in with the particular energy of someone who has had a conversation with her son and is recalibrating her approach to a changed field. She was wearing a coral blouse and her good earrings, which I noted because Dolores's jewelry choices are a form of communication, and her good earrings meant she was taking the day seriously. She was warm to me in a way that was genuinely different from the night before. Not fake. Dolores isn't fake. She's too intelligent for fake, but recalibrated. She touched my arm twice in the first 5 minutes. She said I looked wonderful 2 times. She asked about Portland with the specificity of someone who had done brief research. She mentioned the food scene and the mountains and the fact that Portland was apparently a good city for small businesses, which she said with the particular emphasis of someone trying to demonstrate they know more than you assumed. I hear you've built something impressive out there, she said. I've been working hard, I said. Marcus told me. She smiled. The smile was real and also complicated. Why didn't you share it with us? We would have been so proud. Would you have, I thought, but I said I wasn't sure it would work until recently. Of course. She nodded, moved on smoothly. Well, we're family. Whatever you need. Support, connections, whatever. You know Marcus and I are always here. That's what family is for. The phrase, whatever you need, landed with a slight change in meaning from the night before, when the implicit message had been that I might need her son to position me in the job market. Now that I'd been repositioned in her ledger, whatever you need meant something different, something more lateral. She found a seat at the kitchen table with coffee and held court for a while, talking to my Aunt Gloria about church and summer plans and her neighbor's renovation project, and I watched her do it and felt the familiar, complicated feeling I always felt watching Dolores operate, which was somewhere between respect and wariness, the two things I consistently could not fully separate when it came to her. Then she said, still in that wide communal voice that was theoretically addressed to the table but was actually addressed to me, you know, thinking about legacy, about what we're all building, it makes me so happy that Marcus and I have been able to contribute to keeping the family home in good shape. The roof was such a big thing. We're so glad we could do that. And there it was, the reestablishment of the anchor. Even with the recalibrated warmth, even with the whatever you needs, she was reminding everyone, reminding me that the contribution existed, that it had weight, that it meant something in the economy of the family. I set down my coffee cup. That actually reminds me, I said. I wanted to talk to Grandma today about the house, about ongoing maintenance and the financial upkeep going forward. The kitchen shifted. Dolores looked at me. The house is, we've been handling it, she said. The warmth had not gone, but it had realigned. Like a light source, it has been turned slightly. I know Marcus has been helping. I appreciate that. I want to take over from here. A pause. We've had some conversations with your grandmother about arrangements going forward. What kind of arrangements? Another pause. Just the family has been talking about the future of the property. Who's going to be invested in it long term? Has she agreed to anything formal? Not formal, no, but there have been understandings. I'd like to talk to her, I said, today, if possible. Darius. Her voice had a note of careful warning, not aggressive. Like someone who is trying to manage an outcome from inside a conversation they can feel slipping away from them. I just want to make sure we all approach this thoughtfully, with sensitivity to everything that's been put into this over the past couple of years. I am being thoughtful, I said. That's why I'd like to have the conversation. She looked at me for a moment. Then she looked at Marcus. Then she looked at her coffee cup. Of course, she said. My grandmother was in the side sitting room, the one that faces the garden, with her book. She looked up when I knocked on the open door. I was wondering when you'd come, she said. I sat in the chair across from her. I heard some of the kitchen, she said. Her hearing for 80 is remarkably good. Or perhaps the house carries sound in ways people stop accounting for. I want to handle the house financially, I said. All of it going forward. Regular maintenance, emergency repairs, everything. And I want to reimburse Marcus for the roof. She set the book on her lap. You talked about this last night, she said. I wanted to say it in the daylight. $30,000. 31. I'm adding 1,000 for interest. She was quiet for a moment. He'll be angry, she said. Maybe. Dolores will be. She paused, finding the right word. Dolores will have feelings about this. I know. It will cause friction. I know that too. She looked at me steadily. Why are you doing this, Darius? And I want the real answer, not the financial one. I thought about it. I owed her the real answer. Because this house is yours, I said. Not anybody's investment, not collateral for an expectation, yours and Grandpa's. And I have the means now to make sure it stays yours and to make sure no one can ever construct an argument that they own a piece of it because of what they contributed. I paused. If I can close that loop cleanly, with a check, with a documented decision, then the conversations Dolores has been having become conversations about nothing. And you can make your decisions about what happens to this house based on what you actually want, not on what you feel you owe. My grandmother sat with that for a long time. The garden outside the window was bright in the morning sun. The rose bushes were blooming, deep red, almost obscene in their fullness. Your grandfather planted those the year your father was born, she said. She wasn't changing the subject. She was adding to it. I know, I said. You told me once. He said he wanted something in the ground that would outlast him. She looked at the garden. He was always thinking about what persisted, what you put in the ground and what came back from it. A silence. I'm going to call my attorney on Monday, she said. I should have done it years ago. The estate documents need to be formal and clear. I've been avoiding it because formality feels like planning for death, and I don't care to do that, but I understand now that the avoidance has created problems. You don't need to tell me what's in them. I know I don't. She picked up her book. But I want you to know that they will reflect what I actually want, not what anyone has implied I should want. That's all I needed to hear, I said. One more thing. She looked up at me. I told Dolores last month that the conversations about the house made me uncomfortable, and I'd like them to stop. She said she understood and then had 2 more conversations about it. There was no anger in how she said it, just the flat, clear observation of someone reporting a fact. I know, I said. You do what you need to do, she said. I'll be fine either way, but I appreciate you coming home. The conversation with Marcus happened that afternoon. I didn't engineer it. He found me. I was standing near the side yard by the cars, getting air, just standing. He came around the corner of the house with his hands in his pockets and the particular body language of a man who has decided to have a direct conversation and is still working out exactly what direct is going to look like. He came and stood next to me, not facing me, side by side, both of us looking at the row of cars. That specific male geometry of a conversation neither person entirely wants to be having. For a while, neither of us said anything. I put $30,000 into that roof, he said. I know. I'm going to reimburse you, I said. A silence. I told you I didn't do it to get reimbursed. I know. Then why? Because $30,000 is $30,000, Marcus, and I want the account clean. He turned to look at me for the first time. I looked back. Clean, he said. No informal arrangements, no implied obligations. No one owed anything. The money paid for a roof. The roof is paid for. Done. I watched him understand what I was actually saying. the whole architecture of what had been quietly under construction. The favors, the expectations, Dolores's patient and persistent comments about commitment and legacy and appropriateness. I was proposing to take it apart, to convert it from a relationship into a transaction and then close the transaction, remove it entirely from the emotional ledger where it had been quietly accruing interest. He was quiet for a long time. "That's not what it was," he said. And he said it with something I didn't expect, a slightly wounded quality. Not defensive, actually hurt. "Then what was it?" He looked at the cars. "When you left," he said slowly, "you just left. Nobody knew what you were doing. Nobody knew if you were okay. Grandma would ask about you, and my mom would change the subject because she didn't have anything to tell her, and I think that bothered Grandma more than she showed." He paused. "I know how my mom operates. I'm not stupid. I know the roof became a thing. I know she's been—" He stopped. "I didn't intend for it to be a thing. I did it because the roof needed doing and Grandma needed help and nobody else was stepping up." I believed him. Not entirely, but significantly. Marcus has spent his whole life operating inside his mother's ambitions without always being able to separate his own motivations from hers. And that's a more complicated situation than just calling him a villain. "I believe that," I said. "But your mom made it into something else," I said. "And that doesn't mean your intention was bad, but it means the situation is what it is now, not what you intended." He nodded slowly. "If I reimburse you," I said, "it frees you too. Nobody's owed anything. No leverage, no obligation, no story about who contributed what. Clean." He looked at the ground, rubbed the back of his neck. The specific gesture he's always used when he's arriving at an acceptance he hadn't expected. 2.3 million, he said, mostly to himself. "Yeah, starting from nothing. From $8,200 in one leased car." He shook his head slowly, not dismissively, something like disbelief that was adjacent to admiration. "I should have asked differently," he said, "last night when you got out of the car." "Yeah, I assumed." "You assumed based on what you knew," I said. "You didn't know much. That's on me." "Some of it," I said honestly. "Some of it is on the fact that I didn't tell anyone." He almost smiled. "Yeah, what was that about?" "I needed to know it was mine," I said, "before anyone else had opinions about it." He stood with that. I could see him turning it over. And then he said something I didn't expect. "I get that," he said quietly. "I actually get that." I looked at him. "My mom has been very—" He paused carefully. "She's been very involved in my career from the beginning. Connections, introductions, the narrative about what I'm doing. And I'm grateful. I am. She's the reason I have some of the accounts I have." A pause. "But sometimes I wonder what I would have built if I just built it, without the management." It was the most honest thing I'd heard him say in 10 years of family gatherings. "Yeah," I said. "I know." We stood there for a moment longer. The sounds of the family inside, music, kids, someone's laughter. "I don't need the money," he said. "The 31. I know, but take it anyway." He nodded once. And that was the deal. Dinner that evening was smaller and quieter and better for it. Maybe 14 people. The folding tables had been reduced to one long one. The string lights were still up and the evening had softened to something almost beautiful. That specific late summer evening quality where the light goes golden and the heat becomes warmth instead of punishment. My Uncle Raymond held court in the way he'd been doing for 75 years, telling a story about his 20s that got funnier each time someone pushed back on a detail, and he cheerfully amended it and made it funnier still. My grandmother laughed twice at things that weren't particularly funny, which meant she was happy. My mother sat next to me and didn't say much but kept her hand near mine in the way she does when she's feeling something she won't put into words. Dolores was quiet. Not cold, she was too experienced for cold. But the active energy of the morning had settled into a watchful stillness. She talked to Gloria. She watched Marcus. She smiled at the right moments. She didn't bring up the house. After the food, she found me briefly near the dessert table. "I want you to know," she said, lowering her voice, "that everything I've ever done has come from love for this family. Whatever it looks like from the outside, that's what it comes from." I looked at her for a moment. "I know," I said, "and I genuinely meant it. That's the complicated thing about Dolores. Her love is real. It just moves through channels that cause damage in ways she can't fully see. You've done very well for yourself," she said. "Thank you, Aunt Dolores. I'm proud of you. A beat. I should have said that differently before. When you arrived." She moved on before I could respond, which was probably intentional. That night, I sat on the back porch alone for a while after everyone went inside. The yard was lit by the string lights and the moon, and that was enough. I thought about what 3 years meant. What it meant to spend 36 months building something nobody was watching in a city where I didn't know anyone, without a safety net or an obvious pass back. What it meant to make payroll for 43 families every 2 weeks and have that weight be something I'd chosen and could carry. What it meant to sit in a parking garage at 2 in the morning and not know if it was going to work and get up in the morning and keep going anyway. I thought about my father, who died at 41 before he got to see what he might have built. I thought about my grandfather, who built a house with his own hands and planted rose bushes because he wanted something in the ground that would outlast him. I thought about stubbornness, about whether stubbornness is a virtue or just a trait that sometimes moves in the right direction. I decided it didn't matter. It was what I had. I'd used it. Marcus texted me around 11. The text said, "I talked to my mom tonight. I told her the house conversations needed to stop. She pushed back. I told her again. Thought you should know." I sat with that text for a while. Then I texted back. That wasn't easy. "Thank you." He responded, "It needed to happen." Way before tonight. I just didn't do it. A pause. Then, for what it's worth, I meant what I said about the car thing. Shouldn't have done it. I typed back, "Already forgot about it." And then, "But your face when Earl called me boss was genuinely priceless." 3 seconds. Then, "Yeah, okay, it was a moment." I put the phone down and sat in the yard and let the night do what Georgia nights do in the summer, which is to hold you in warmth that is generous, even when it's heavy. I called Earl at 9 the next morning. He pulled up at 10 exactly, which he always did, because Earl was one of those people for whom punctuality was not a habit, but an expression of character. He loaded my bag in the trunk, came around to the passenger door. The morning was already warm, climbing toward the way July mornings do here. My grandmother came onto the front porch, then my mother, then Janelle, and the cousins who'd stayed overnight, then Marcus and Trina, who had stayed at a hotel but come back for breakfast and hadn't left yet, and a few others, filtering out because that's what families do at departures. They accumulate. Earl stepped out of the driver's side the way he does and came around and held the door. "Ready when you are, Mr. Cole," he said. From the porch, my grandmother called, "Errol, you take care of him." Earl looked up and touched the brim of his flat cap, that old-fashioned gesture that I'd noticed when I first met him and had come to love. "Yes, ma'am. Always." I looked at my grandmother. She had the expression of a woman who has decided something and is at peace with it. I looked at Janelle, who was smiling with the specific satisfaction of someone who has watched something work out the way it should. I looked at Marcus. He was watching Earl hold the door. Something was happening in his face. Not the competitive recalibration of the previous day. Not the wounded honesty of our conversation by the cars. Something quieter. Something that looked, if I'm reading it right, like a man in the middle of a slow reckoning. I looked at my mother last. She was standing on the bottom porch step and she was crying very slightly, the way she cries, which is without any fanfare. Just a few tears she doesn't try to hide. I got in the car. As Earl pulled out and turned onto the street, I looked back through the rear window. The house in the morning light. The porch ride sat on the swing with my grandmother. The front yard where Marcus had laughed when I arrived. The rose bushes in full bloom, deep red against the white paint, enormous and abundant, and so much themselves they were almost aggressive about it. My grandfather planted them the year his son was born. He said he wanted something that would come back every year whether you tended it or not. They've been coming back for 31 years. There are things that happened after, and I want to tell you because stories don't end at the driveway, and the ones that pretend they do are missing the part where the real meaning settles. 2 weeks after the reunion, I had a cashier's check overnighted to Marcus for $31,000 with a handwritten note that said, "Thank you for taking care of her when she needed it." I mean that, without qualification. He called me 3 days after it arrived. Not a text, a call, which meant something. He said he'd received it. He said he wanted me to know that when he paid for the roof, it was because the roof needed doing, and he loved his grandmother, and he understood that what happened after that wasn't entirely on him, but some of it was. He said he'd talked to his mother again. He said it had not gone well, but that he'd said what he needed to say. "She'll be fine," he said. "She's disappointed, but she'll recalibrate." "She always does," I said. He laughed once. "Yeah." Then he said, "I've been thinking about what you said, about building something because it was yours, without the management." A pause. I'm good at my job. I know that. But I've been thinking about whether I built it or whether I was built into it. I didn't have an answer for him. But I told him it was a good question, which it was. "We should talk more," he said. "Like this. Not at family things." "Yeah," I said, "we should. We haven't yet, as of me writing this. But the doors open in a way that it wasn't before the reunion. What comes to it depends on both of us, and I'm not in a hurry either way. Some things grow at the pace they grow. My grandmother called her attorney the Monday after the reunion and began the process of formalizing the estate documents. 6 weeks later, she called to tell me it was done. She didn't share the details, and I didn't ask. What she said was that everything was clear and formal and that she was satisfied. She said it with the tone of someone who has completed a task that should have been completed years ago and is not particularly interested in dwelling on the delay. It's done, she said. I want you to know that. I know it, I said. Thank you. Don't thank me, she said. I did what I should have done. You don't get thanked for that. You just do it. That's my grandmother, 80 years old and still running the tightest ethical ship of anyone I know. Dolores, according to my mother, was quiet about it. She did not make a scene. She did not confront anyone. She absorbed the information with the equanimity of a woman who has been navigating family dynamics for decades and understands that not every campaign succeeds and that the next gathering is always coming. Whether this meant she'd genuinely accepted it or was waiting for the right moment, I honestly couldn't tell you. Dolores is patient in ways that I find either admirable or unsettling depending on my mood. But nothing has moved since. The conversations have stopped. My grandmother called me a week after the estate was formalized at about 7 in the evening, and we talked for an hour about nothing in particular: her garden, the church choir, the book she was reading, a story about my grandfather I hadn't heard before involving a broken lawnmower and a neighbor's dog, and an outcome that remains, somehow, unclear. Before she hung up, she said, almost as an afterthought, I want you to come back for Christmas. Your mother will be here. Janelle might come. I'll be there, I said, not in a taxi this time. I'll see what I can arrange, I said. She laughed. Stubbornness, she said. Every generation. I keep thinking it will wear out. It doesn't. I'm writing this down because I've been trying to understand what the story means, and sometimes the only way to understand what a thing means is to write it down and see what shape it takes. Here is what I keep coming back to. The taxi entrance lasted about 45 seconds. Marcus laughed. Earl said, Boss. The laughing stopped. 45 seconds. I've told that part first in every version of this. I've rehearsed in my head because it's the satisfying moment, the cinematic beat, the thing that makes people go, oh wow, and I understand why that part is compelling. But it is the smallest part. The part that mattered was 3 years of driving my own shifts at 2 in the morning and calling out sick never and making payroll when I wasn't sure I could, and sitting in parking garages calculating whether I'd made a catastrophic mistake and deciding each time to get up in the morning and keep going anyway. 43 people who come to work because I built something reliable enough to work inside. A hospital contract. A grandmother who will spend her final years in her own home without owing anyone anything for it. A cousin who called me on the phone and said I've been thinking about whether I built it or was built into it, which is one of the most important questions a person can ask themselves. None of that happened in 45 seconds. None of that happened because of a taxi. I think a lot about what my grandfather said when he planted the rose bushes, that he wanted something in the ground that would come back every year whether you tended it or not. I understand that impulse now in a way I don't think I could have understood it before I built something. You want the thing to be self-sustaining. You want to put it in the ground and have it persist because of what it is, not because someone is constantly holding it up. I don't know everything I'm planting. I'm 31 years old and I'm still in the first chapters of building whatever it is I'm building. But I know that the stubbornness is real and it is mine, and it came from somewhere in the same blood as the man who built this house and the woman who has kept it for 52 years and the father I barely got to know who was somehow reportedly a version of all of them. The rose bushes are in full bloom this time of year. Deep red, enormous, excessive, coming back without anyone asking them to. I'll be home for Christmas. I'll drive.